Hey, Joe.
Hi, Malcolm. How are you?
I'm fine. Just trying to keep up with everything in our strange world of
Really
COVID. Yeah. We're trying to get public participation, but it's not really happening. You know, in our meetings, everybody is disconnected.
Yeah. I feel disconnected. I really do.
You know, and we used to have pretty vigorous, public input on one thing and another, and now it's almost nothing.
Yeah.
And our meeting lasted an hour last night. Our meetings used to last as long as 4 hours. Last night it lasted an hour.
That's amazing.
It just, nobody seems to be focused on anything.
Right. I think everybody's just sitting around waiting for this to be over so they can carry on again or something.
I don't know. It seems strange. Everything seems strange.
Yeah.
I don't know if you get the same feeling. Are you still involved in Niles at all?
I am. And I'll tell you what, we haven't had a airport meeting since March, and nobody seems to want to have one.
No, it's like anything else. Nobody seems to want to do anything.
Hi, Jeanette.
Good morning.
You know, we'll get through it. And we'll all be at a meeting complaining that we have to get up earlier to go to the meeting instead of just rolling out of bed and showing up.
Yeah, with a t-shirt still on. Yeah.
I've got this nice shirt on and a pair of pajamas. I'm just kidding.
For 30 years, I put on a suit. Now I've got all sorts of different.
Yeah. I got ties and sport coats. I'll probably never wear them again.
All right, I got a whole closet full of them. I don't know what'll ever happen.
Yeah. Jeanette, is there any indication when we might start getting together again in person? No.
I do not until the
Yeah.
state comes up with a plan.
We're not getting together until this is over.
We'll just have to wait.
Hello.
Well, the governor's not going to let kids play high school football, so it's going to be a while, I think.
Okay. So are they? Okay, so
Yeah, I need to remind everyone to mute your devices.
Well, you don't want to hear me talk, huh, Jeanette?
No.
No.
Unless you have
Watch
some
us muted.
private side conversations. No.
Oh, I get it. Okay. But I'll mute anyway just because I'm a sport.
Yeah. I think the displayed staff would want to mute.
Good morning, Jeanette.
Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning, Joe.
Hey, Ryan, how you doing?
Good.
Good. Hey, Cynthia.
Hi.
Hey, Dan.
Hello, you're catching us all off guard with the unmute.
Mhm.
Just go through the whole cycle, see who can respond the quickest.
Morning, all.
Hey, Frank.
Good morning.
Joe, who decided to repave Howard and Toohey at the same time? Come on, man.
I know. I have nothing to do with it anymore, but it has to do with their water thing.
That's bad out there.
Well, look at the good part. We'll be paying for cheaper water when it's all over with.
That's true. That's true. Send it back south to Chicago's Edison Park, would you?
Yeah, right. We tried to negotiate with Chicago, and they were like, you're like a little fish in the sea. We don't care what you do. So I said, okay.
I know.
There's a lot of little fish in the sea are looking for other ways to find water.
Yeah. We're still a third of our water comes from Chicago. 2/3 from Northwest Water.
Yeah.
But the Chicago part's going up fast. So,
Yeah, there's no controlling it. It just keeps going up.
yeah, I know. And we get pressure all the time to lower water rates. Tell them
Yeah.
we can't do it. Sorry.
Morning, everyone.
Hey, Ernie.
Morning, Ernie.
Morning.
Ernie, are you really outside, or is that a fake background?
That is a fake background, Joe.
Yeah, disappoint me.
You got fighter jets right over your head, Ernie. That's good.
Those are the Blue Angels when they were here doing the hospital tour.
Yeah. Try swatting them like that.
There, I just pulled a Dennis.
Good morning.
Nice, Joe.
Thanks.
Is that the Tetons?
Yeah, those are the Tetons.
My son Mark would love them. He loves climbing those hills or mountains.
We've been there a few times. They're really fun. Really nice.
Yeah.
Gorgeous there. All right. I better get back to business. Hi, Mayor.
Morning. How are you?
All right.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning. I got a huge shock yesterday. I went out to buy some ink for a printer. There is no ink to be found.
Ooh.
They're blaming homeschooling and everybody conducting meetings at home for a run on printers and ink.
Really?
I went for an ink cartridge and ended up having to buy a new printer with toner instead of ink. Ridiculous.
Wow.
I'll send you the bill, Joe.
Sure.
Just won't get paid.
Something tells me it's going to get lost in the mail, though.
Circular file.
Yeah.
You know, I buy these blue latex gloves for when I paint or I work around the house.
Yeah,
I buy them at the local hardware store. They're $5 for 50 of them. I went there the other day. It was $15 and they were sold out.
yeah. Crazy.
I'm here on voice only. I'm having trouble with my iPad.
Oh.
Dennis.
Well, we're 1 minute away and we're missing a few people.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Joe?
Yeah, I can hear you, Dennis.
Okay, thank you.
It looks like everybody in the committee is here, so I'd like to call the Flag Quiet Committee meeting of Tuesday, September 22nd, 2020, a Zoom teleconference that's being scheduled for 9:30 to be open.
I'm going to tell Jim.
What's that?
Well, just so he knows I'm joining this meeting this morning.
Okay, could I hear a roll call, Jeanette?
Yes. Bentonville? Bentonville?
Here.
City of Chicago 39th Ward?
Here.
Des Plaines?
Here.
Elmhurst?
Here.
Harwood Heights? Niles?
Here.
Park Ridge?
Here.
River Grove?
Here.
Schaumburg? Schiller Park?
Here.
And Wooddale.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, very good. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes of the August 20th, 2020 Flag Quiet Committee meeting?
Almost so.
Wooddale.
Okay, can we have a roll call for approval?
Yes. Bentonville?
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward?
Yes.
Des Plaines?
Yes.
Elmhurst? Elmhurst? Harwood Heights? Harwood Heights?
Yes.
Niles?
Yes.
Park Ridge?
Yes.
River Grove?
Yes.
Schaumburg?
Yes.
Schiller Park?
Yes.
And Wooddale?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The minutes have been approved. We got a lot of things to hear about today, so let's get right into it. Ryan, are you ready to go?
Yes, sir. Good morning. We do have a lot of material to discuss today. First, we're going to go over the interim flight quiet report for what we're referring to as part 1. Let me pull it up. Okay, everyone should see it on their screens. Again, the interim flight quiet runway rotation program began last November, and we ran through mid-May, where we had to hit the pause button to accommodate some major rehabilitation work on runway 4 right, 22 left. So we paused through the summer, and then we resumed flight quiet this month. We're actually now in week 30, I believe, of the rotation. But we wanted to present today a report for what we're referring to as part 1 of the interim flight quiet runway rotation program that occurred between November and May. So the report is similar to what we put together for you when we completed test 3. So we have a summary, basically some background and some highlights of the program. The page 1 highlight really is not that great of a highlight, but we'll talk about it more. The results of part 1 show that 50% of the operations that were intended to occur on the scheduled runways did so. So we only got about 50% utilization of our scheduled runways during the flight quiet hours in IFQ part 1. We had an average of 83 operations per night, 43 of which of those occurred on designated runways.
Ryan, you just said 83. Do you mean 86?
I do mean 86, Aaron. Thank you. Page 2, we have a summary of flight quiet mode, defining flight quiet mode. We also have some highlights as far as we did have 6 nights that occurred in part 1 that flight quiet mode occurred during the entire 9-hour nighttime period. Again, nighttime occurs, we use the FAA's definition of nighttime, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. And these dates in April and May, we did get the full night of 9 hours where the airport operated in flight quiet mode. Now, as we all know, and we've talked about in this committee as well as tech committee, the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the operations at O'Hare. This was mainly driven by the low operations that we saw in April and May that allowed the airport to operate in flight quiet mode for the entire 9-hour period. We also had one night on November 6th where the airport was only able to operate in flight quiet mode for a very limited amount of time, about 3 hours. This was November 6th. We had a major snow event that evening, and flight quiet we had to come out of flight quiet at about 3 a.m. Due to the snow event that was occurring. You'll see we plotted all the start and stop times here on figure 1. We have an average start time of 10:44 p.m. and an average stop time of 6 a.m., which is very good. In our technical committee meetings, when we go through the flight quiet report, I will tend to see the average stop time of flight quiet mode around 5:45 a.m. So we have a later stop time of 6 a.m. Again, most likely driven by the lower operations that we saw in the spring of this year. And then here's our outlier here of that 3 a.m. stop time due to that snow event in November. Page 3, the top of page 3, we plotted the average start and stop times for the entire IFQ part 1. And the line graph here really illustrates the drive of departures for when we were able to start flight quiet mode, and also the arrival demand when we have to come out of flight quiet mode. So you'll see this red line here is depicting that arrival demand increasing from the early hours. And that arrival demand reaches a threshold where we're unable to operate on a single arrival runway, and we'll have to open up a second runway to accommodate this arrival bank that starts in the early morning. Page 3 at the bottom here, figure 3, we have our 6 flight quiet configurations that were used for IFQ. And then the top of page 4, we break out how we were able to use those configurations. The configurations H, I, K, L, M, and O. O was able to be used the most, 76%. O is the departing on 28 right and arriving on 28 center. This is again a typical configuration for West Flow, not only for nighttime but also for daytime. And then the next one was H at 34%. That's arrivals on 27 left and departures on 28 center. And then I, 24%, arrivals on 22 right and departures on 22 left. Now, the reason why we had O, H, and I as predominant configurations. A big driver to that was, and I'll get to the wind summary on the next page, we were predominantly in west flow for interim flight quiet part 1. So our west flow configurations were the ones that were utilized the most, and by far O was utilized the best. Configuration K, 9%, which is departures on 9 right and arrivals on 10 left. Typically we would see that get better utilization. However, because we were in west flow predominantly through IFQ part 1, and the weeks that we were scheduled to use this, we also had some other issues as far as maintenance and construction that affected it. So we did not see great utilization of K in part 1 of the program. The bottom of page 4 breaks out that 50% of operations that were not able to utilize our designated runways and the reasons for that. Predominantly, we had weather and operational requirements were the main reason for the poor usage of designated runways in part 1. We also had the aircraft parked on the ground. We've talked about this before in both this committee and technical committee. We had, due to the COVID pandemic, a large number of aircraft had to be temporarily parked on the airfield. And some of those, unfortunately, were parked in an area that were interfering with the critical area of the ILS for runways 4 left, 22 right. So that runway had to be closed down for arrivals for a period when we were in IFQ. So again, all of these factors played into half of the operations not occurring on the runways that we were scheduled to do so. Page 5, we break out the utilization further with total and average arrivals and departures. You'll see on the left here, total arrivals for IFQ part 1, 10,890, departures 5,544. So predominantly the amount of operations that occurred in flight quiet mode were arrivals. Again, that averages out to 57 arrivals and 29 departures per night. Figure 5, our tree map, displays the most used arrival and departure runways. So our workhorse for IFQ for arrivals was 28 center and departures was 28 right. And you can see the other runways broken out by their utilization. 4 left being the least used for arrivals, 4 right the least used for departures. And then we also have it color coded by east flow and west flow. As you can see, west flow predominantly the configurations that we were in IFQ part 1. And that was due to our winds during the period. As you can see in our wind occurrence diagram here, we had predominantly west flow winds throughout IFQ part 1. So November through May, we were predominantly westerly winds, which put the airport in a west flow configuration for most weeks. And then on page 7, we have a summary of wide body aircraft operations. We have two runways that large wide body aircraft typically use, the 10 left, 28 right, which is 13,000 feet long, and our current Group 6 runway, 10 center, 28 center, which is 10,800 feet long. And of all the wide bodies which operated in flight quiet part 1, 11% of the wide bodies used a runway less than 10,000 feet. So we have these runways here identified: 4 left, 22 right, 9 right, 27 left, 4 right, 22 left. So 11% of the wide body operations were able to use those 3 runways. The remainder had to use the 10 left, 28 right, or 10 center, 28 center. And then the remainder of the report is our summary reports. We have our summary for the entire period of IFQ. Again, the 50% of operations occurring on designated runways. Average time in flight quiet, 7 hours and 16 minutes with our average start and stop times. We have our IFQ daily logs, or I should refer to as nightly logs, that break out the percentage and duration of nighttime that we were in flight quiet mode for each night during IFQ Part 1, and the percentage of utilization of operations for each primary and secondary configurations. And we have that throughout the entire period. We do have a handful of nights where we did not receive radar data for those nights, so we don't have a percentage of utilization. And we did have one evening where we were not able to enter into flight quiet mode due to inclement weather. We also have weekly wind summaries for the entire period, each week showing what the winds looked like. Runway use report for the entire period. Again, 28 right was our predominant runway, 45%, and 28 center was our predominant arrival runway with 31%. And then a summary of all the airlines that operated in flight quiet mode through the period of IFQ Part 1, listing the airlines, the number of arrivals and departures, and whether or not they are a dedicated passenger or cargo. As you can see, by far our top 2 airlines are United and American that operated during the overnight hours in IFQ Part 1. And then as far as cargo, we have FedEx and UPS operating as well. And then lastly, we have a fleet mix report, the fleet mix of aircraft that operated in flight quiet mode during Part 1. Predominantly, the most used aircraft type in IFQ Part 1 was the narrow body, with over 50% of the operations being narrow bodies for flight quiet operations.
One thing I'd like to add is that you can see from the numbers on an average night, you're seeing about 28 operations for wide body aircraft, which represents about 1/4 of the overnight activity. So one thing I want to remind all of the committee members is that a lot of people think that, you know, there's a lot of wide body flights at night. Yes, there are some wide body, but as you can see from these numbers over this 5 to 6 month period, only 1/4 of those aircraft are wide bodies. So that's just an important sort of factoid to have, you know, on your mind.
Okay, are there any questions about the interim flight quiet rotation program report Part 1?
Alderman Dunn has a question.
Yes, thank you. Just one piece of data that I thought was interesting or compelling was the arrivals exceeded the departures by a count of 2 to 1. So it seemed like we were collecting aircraft inventory overnight on a regular basis. So is that something we saw in previous fly quiet tests? Because I think that is something to note.
We have, so in the previous tests, arrivals have always dominated departures during the overnight hours, and it's really driven by the early morning demand that we've seen. The airlines, the way they've been scheduling their flights at O'Hare for many years is they continually to schedule flights to get in early, kind of the first flight of the day, to get the aircraft here, to get departures out. So we'll see a number of flights originating from, you know, the East Coast or West Coast, getting here early to connect to, you know, long range flights, either international departures later in the day. So this arrival demand has been common for many years. We just, I believe in this part one, it was a little bit more prominent than we've seen in the past, but it's always been a trend. The arrivals and the early morning demand and the departures are always the late evening demand.
Ernie, you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everyone. And good morning, Ryan. Great presentation. Could you back up the presentation to the slide that showed the 50% utilization and the reasons why, other than 50%? That's it. Perfect. Operational requirements. Not having it right in front of me, but I see there's a footnote there of 1. Can I assume that operational requirements is the reasoning why certain aircraft wouldn't accept a designated runway at that moment in time?
Well, it's a combination of a number of things. I wouldn't say wouldn't accept being a prominent one. We do have periods of the evening where we are transitioning from one runway to another, and those happen to be in those time periods in the evening or early morning where we have a high demand level. And so we're still operating in one arrival runway and one departure runway configuration, but they are utilizing another runway other than is requested, as well as we have, again, the safety inspections. That's another constant that we can't really control. Those have to occur every night, and those play into it as well. So we have a number of reasons that go into that, but yes, those capture those flights that aren't able to be accommodated on the designated runway if it's either a wind or length issue.
A second question along those lines then. From what I've calculated, and I took the post-COVID weeks out of it because of the issue of the ILS being out of service on 4 left, 22 right, because of the aircrafts that were parked on the North Airfield. It looks as though that when the diagonals were in use, that the utilization there was about 36% of the time. Am I at least fairly close on that figure?
Well, you can see, yeah, I guess I'm not sure where, it sounds right, but I can't verify that that's 100% right.
So I'm curious, if you took the diagonals out of the mix and said, what would have the utilization been in IFQ during that period of time, which is at 50% now, how much higher would it have been if we eliminated the pullback that you got from the fact that during the weeks we used the diagonals, it was only a utilization of 36%?
Yeah, I don't know that number.
I know you don't have the answer to it, but I'd be curious to know what happens to efficiency, if you will, if all of a sudden the diagonals weren't part of the mix.
Right, we'd have to calculate that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dan, your turn.
Yes, Ryan. How closely did this match the FAA's projections for the reavail for utilization?
That's a good question, and I don't have that answer. We'd have to take a look at and compare the forecast utilization versus what actually occurred. Again, this is only part one, so it's not an apples to apples kind of comparison, but that's something we can take a look at.
All right.
Dan, we can have that ready for you at the next meeting.
Okay, and particularly because I think Alderman Dunn pointed out something very interesting, and I don't recall whether that was specific to the reavail about how heavily weighted arrivals are, and something we should definitely look at. Thanks.
All right, Cynthia, you're next.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of rephrase Ernie's question to Ryan. And what do you think the utilization rate would be if you had 2 long alternate runways and you were able to designate one in diagonal weeks?
I don't know the answer to that. We'd have to, if I'm understanding, I'm not sure I understand the question either. Are you asking what the utilization would be if we had a 3rd runway designated?
I am, because you're going to default to a third runway. You mentioned 28 wide-body aircraft, of which 89% default to a long runway. That 50 or 38% utilization of the diagonals, or 36%, to me, with those numbers, with the weighting of the long aircraft that are defaulting to the long runway, I see these diagonal performance numbers as reasonable and what would be expected. And the utilization, the way you're measuring it, would be different if we would just account for those 28 wide-body aircraft that are not going to use the diagonals, instead of representing it as a missed efficiency on the program.
Okay, yeah, we could take a look at that and run some numbers and bring that back to committee.
All right, Ron, you have a question?
Yeah, just a comment, since we're talking about the diagonals. I just want to remind everyone that we did discuss this before, that with the diagonal use, that the committee did feel that there was a way to increase the utilization of the diagonals with some outreach to the airlines and some monitoring of even the narrow body aircraft that for some reason aren't using them but are trying to use a longer runway, that through the outreach and through the monitoring of it, that we probably can get that use of the diagonals to increase. Let me know if that's incorrect, Ryan.
No, that's very true. That's something we've talked about, that, you know, we believe further outreach would help the utilization of those runways. Outreach and, you know, kind of some sort of future program. If we were to have a future program, this committee or the technical committee could play a major role in, I don't want to use too strong of a word like policing, but, you know, keeping a close eye on utilization and following up with those airlines to making sure that it was absolutely necessary when they did not follow the program.
And Ryan, if I'm not mistaken, that other airports, and we got to come up with a better word than policing, but other airports, community groups do have a role in policing the airlines. Is that correct?
Yes, there are plenty of other community-led groups like yourself at other airports that act as a oversight of their noise abatement programs and do monitor and follow up with airlines that do not follow the program as outlined. So yes, there are plenty of other airports that do have that.
Okay, so that would be something that I think we should discuss at some point, whether that should fall under fly quiet or technical. I don't have a preference.
Evan, I was thinking maybe you and I can talk to each other quickly after this, you know, maybe not today, but the next day or so, about how we can, how fly quiet and tech could work together to find this information out.
That'd be great, Joe. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Now, the next couple items are going to be quite involved. So what I'm going to ask from everybody is that leave your comments to the end of the presentation and only ask a question if it has to do with a clarification of what's being said. I'd appreciate that, because it's going to take a little time. And with that, long runway availability.
Actually, with your permission, Mr. Chair, I'm going to reverse items 5 and 6, and I'm going to do 6 first, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. And to your point, I think, you know, maybe hold the questions till I'm done with each section, the intersection departure section, and then the long runway section. So I guess if you have any questions, we'll wait till the end of the section. So again, we'll start off with our process slide. And I know many of you kind of moan and groan at this one, that we're still kind of here at this section of develop and improve alternatives. However, I believe we're very close to moving this arrow to the next box. And after this discussion today, we'll talk about that further. But again, we are currently here in the development and approval of alternatives before we can make a committee recommendation, which will then move to the full commission for recommendation to the CDA to submit for FAA air traffic environmental review and hopefully subsequent approval, where then this organization will then work on outreach and implementation. Again, we have our decision pyramid. We've established the goals. One of the first things we did was come up with our goals and objectives and guiding principles so that the alternatives we develop, we have some sort of framework. We developed and approved the 8 criteria and which outlines which runways are to be used in the program. We made a decision, RNAV is something the committee wants to at least pursue as a potential inclusion in a future program. And now we are putting together all the available possibilities of alternatives so that this committee can deliberate and narrow it down to a preferred alternative for committee recommendation. And again, we have all our components of a potential new program. We have our configurations, which runways we're using for departures and arrivals, how we're going to rotate those configurations, what type of departure procedures we're going to be using, how those departure profiles might be utilized, as well as ground movements we can talk about, and ultimately stakeholder coordination. How will this program be communicated to all stakeholders, and how can we get stakeholder buy-in so that we have a successful program? So first, we're going to talk about intersection departures. This is something that's been a topic that's kind of, we've discussed a little bit here and there, but it's kind of been lingering, and we want to provide you with some clear explanation of what intersection departures are. And the FAA Air Traffic has given us some feedback that intersection departures will need to be used with some of the configurations that we're looking at. So we wanted to talk to you about what those look like, not only how they work, but as well as we did a noise comparison between intersection departures and full length departures. So as a committee, you can decide, is this an issue that you really want to pursue further, or is it something that is not going to be that significant of a problem? So first we have a diagram here where we're showing runway 9 center, 27 center. We're at the runway end of 9 center for departure. And this in particular instance, we're going to use an intersection departure here. The intersection departure means that the aircraft would depart, taxi onto the runway and depart as if the runway started at a taxiway intersection, in this case, Foxtrot, Foxtrot. So for 9 center departures, intersection departures, the aircraft would use the runway as if it started here as opposed to at the runway end. Now 9 center, 27 center, which opens up in November, is a 11,000 foot, 245 foot runway. When we use the taxiway Foxtrot, Foxtrot for intersection departures, that runway then becomes 9,202 feet. So a little over 2,000 foot difference of a runway length. This allows ground traffic to taxi behind the departing traffic. We have talked about this in this committee in the past about the number of ground movements that occur during the overnight hours, especially between the maintenance complex here at the northwest area of the airport and the terminal core. So there's a lot of ground traffic of aircraft being towed and taxied to and from the north and the terminal core area. This intersection departure allows the taxi flow to occur without affecting safety or efficiency of the departing aircraft. So the next example we have is on the reciprocal side of 27 center. Again, this runway is 11,245 feet. when we use an intersection departure on this runway at Tango Tango, the runway becomes 9,962 feet, so a little over 1,000-foot difference. Now, there was a difference in the available length of runway from 9 center versus 27 center, and that is due to the location of the available taxiway for intersection departure. You can see on the 27 center end, taxiway Tango Tango is closer to the runway end than Foxtrot Foxtrot was to the 9 center end. But again, the same concept to allow a free flow of taxi uninterrupted behind the departing aircraft that allows for safer and more efficient departures and ground movements during the overnight hours. Now, when we look at runway 9 right, now when 9 right, 27 left is fully extended, and we'll begin construction on that next year. The full length will be 11,260 feet. We would use a intersection departure here at this taxiway. Actually, this taxiway has yet to be built or named, so we'll for now call it TBD. But once this taxiway is in place, this is where we anticipate the intersection to departure to occur. And then we're left with the runway 9,870 feet. And again, allowing the free flow of taxi movements behind the departing aircraft. And this also, not only for ground movements to and from the terminal core and maintenance area, but if we are using 9 center in a configuration, a North Airfield configuration, for instance, if we're using 9 center for arrivals and 9 right for departures, this also allows the arrival aircraft to taxi back and cross the runway safely to the terminal core without interrupting the departure traffic on 9 right. And then the reciprocal on the 27 left end, the intersection departure again at taxiway Tango Tango. That leaves us with a runway of 9,961 feet. And again, same concept, flow of traffic. This time, if we are arriving 27 center, the 27 center arrival aircraft are able to taxi back and cross the departing runway 20, active runway 27 left to get to the terminal core without affecting the departure traffic. So before we get into this, we looked at the noise modeling of, we built a noise model in ADT to do a comparison of intersection departures versus full length, so that we can look at what is the altitude difference as well as the noise difference between an intersection departure and a full length departure. Oops, I think, let me do one real quick here. There we go. Sorry, lost a slide there. So first I want to talk about the assumptions that we put into the model. Similar to our LMAX contours that we use for our departure concept presentations, we used ADT to do a noise model. We used a single departure with average weather. We did 3 separate aircraft. We did a Boeing 737-800, which is our most frequent aircraft type in flight quiet mode. This is our narrow body. We did a regional jet, Bombardier CRJ-200, which was our most frequent regional jet in flight quiet mode, as well as Boeing 747-800, which is our loudest aircraft type in flight quiet mode for calendar year 2019. We had to set a standard departure profile. A departure profile is basically giving the model information as to how far the aircraft is going, so it knows how heavy the aircraft needs to be, how much runway it needs to use, and how the performance will be on takeoff. So we used 3 different stage lengths for 3 different aircraft types. For the CRJ, the narrow body, we used a stage length of 1. Stage length refers to a distance of where the aircraft is going. In this case, stage length 1 would be markets such as like St. Louis, which is typical for all our regional jets operating out of O'Hare. They typically go to closer in Midwest cities. So we use the stage length of 1 for the CRJ 200. For the Boeing 737-800, we use a stage length of 2, which captures the majority of domestic markets except for the West Coast, so which is typical for O'Hare, this aircraft type flying to, let's say, East Coast cities. So this stage length would capture all of that traffic. And then the Boeing 747-800, we use a stage length of 5. Stage length of 5 would be if the aircraft were, let's say, flying to Anchorage, which a lot of our cargo aircraft do, take off from O'Hare and go to Anchorage to get more fuel and or cargo, or to go to London, England, for instance. We used the full build-out runway layout and lengths. We compared full-length runway and intersection departures. The aircraft flies the heading or procedure, and it flies it perfectly, which means it takes off and turns at the runway threshold and doesn't deviate. So there's no deviation due to performance or wind. It flies the heading perfectly. And then we did 10 grid points for each runway end. So a grid point is basically, we look at a point geographically, and we're able to, the model tells us what the altitude and the noise would be at that specific point. In this case, we looked at Lmax as well as altitude. And so we did a grid point for every mile starting from the end of the runway with 1 mile increments. So we have 10 grid points for each runway end. Okay, so let's look at the altitudes first. So we have our 3 aircraft types. And like I mentioned, we did 10 grid points. So we have a point for each mile, and we have an altitude for each mile from the runway end. And we compare full length versus intersection. The miles are in statute miles, and the altitude is in above ground level. For our CRJ 200, you'll see the light color is our full length. So our full length departure, when we look at 5 miles from the runway end, the model puts it at 4,019 feet above the ground. When we compare that to the intersection departure, the aircraft is at 3,912 feet with a difference of 107 feet. So at 5 miles, the model is telling us that a full length will put the aircraft 107 feet higher than a intersection departure. When we look at the Boeing 737-800, same runway, 9 right, intersection versus full length. At the 5 mile point, we have an altitude of 4,259 feet for a full length departure versus 4,067 feet for an intersection departure with a 192 foot difference. So a full length departure puts the aircraft approximately 192 feet higher at 5 miles out versus an intersection departure. And then the Boeing 737-800 9 right departure at 5 miles, 2,478 feet altitude is what the model says it will get to with a full length versus the intersection departure of 2,396 feet, giving us an 82 foot difference. We went ahead and put the actual height of tail heights of our 3 aircraft here just to give you some reference as to the difference. And you can see the difference between a full-length intersection departure for a Boeing 747-800 is barely higher than the aircraft itself. Visually, if I were on the ground, could I be able to tell one was higher than the other? Possibly, but it is a very slight difference. Now, when we look at the 27 left departure intersection versus full length, we have the same comparisons. For our CRJ, we have a 4,000 foot altitude at 5 miles versus 3,904 feet for a 100-foot difference between full length and intersection. For the Boeing 737-800, it performs better and gets to an altitude of 4,238 feet at full length versus 4,570 feet for a 181-foot difference. And then the Boeing 747-800 with a 27 left departure, 2,461 feet versus 383 feet, for a 78-foot difference. Again, the Boeing 737-800 is the newest of these three aircraft, and it has much better performance, much better engine performance. So as you can see, its profile is much more impressive than the other three, and is able to get up and going much quicker, especially compared to the Boeing 747-800. So that's a comparison of the altitudes. We also wanted to look at what is the comparison when we look at the noise. So we looked at Lmax for each one of those 10 grid points. We'll stick with the 5-mile grid point here. And for the CRJ 200, the Lmax at full length at 5 miles was 65.5 decibels. The Lmax at the intersection departure at 5 miles was 65.89 decibels. So this is telling, the model is telling us that there was a 0.39 decibel difference or higher increase between a intersection departure versus a full length. If we looked at all 10 grid points and the average of the difference between full length and intersection departure, the average is 0.48 decibels higher between an intersection departure and a full length. And again, we have the same metrics for the Boeing 737 and 747. And as you can see, the grid point average 0.5 decibels higher for between a intersection departure and a full length, as well as 0.49 decibels average difference greater than an intersection departure versus a full length. The same metrics we did for the 27 left intersection departure versus full length. So Lmax again at 5 miles for each of our 3 aircraft types, full length 65.55 decibels, 71 decibels, 79.44 decibels. Intersection departure is slightly more, 65.91 decibels, 71.44 decibels, 79.84 decibels for the 747-800. And again, this is a slight difference of between the slightly louder between an intersection departure and full length, 0.36 decibels for the CRJ 200, 0.44 decibels for the Boeing 737-800, and 0.4 decibels for the Boeing 747-800. Average grid point of all 10 grid points is all averaged below a half a decibel increase between the two intersection versus full length. We also, now these models that we've just gone through and the outputs were based on a straight out departure. We also looked at a turn. So we did a 9 right intersection departure versus full length with a 25-degree turn to the north. So this would have been a 9 right departure with a 065-degree heading, which we have used in some of our alternatives. And as you can see, again, the average difference is about a half a decibel greater than a full length departure. So intersection departure, just slightly louder than a full length departure when we're looking at the 5 Lmax metric. So this brings me back to Noise 101. Those are the, you have, all of you have mostly have taken Noise 101 with me and is available from Jeanette with the slide deck. But one of the things that we talk about is our rules of thumb. And the smallest detectable change by the human ear is 1 decibel, which means if something were to get louder by a half a decibel, it would be very very hard for a human ear to detect that, especially in a environment with ambient noise levels, such as being outside or in your home with other things being loud. So going back to this decibel increase between an intersection departure and a full length, it is a very slight increase, and it would be very hard for someone to actually notice a noise difference between those two. So does anybody that have any questions at this point regarding the noise difference between an intersection departure and a full length? Noise or altitude difference?
Yes, Russ from Schiller Park. Ryan?
Yes.
Okay, Russ from Schiller Park.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I have a question, and I hope I'm kind of on task a little bit. What would the dB be over Schiller Park with the full length or versus the intersection departure versus 5 miles out? Because I see that being more over Schiller Park area or surrounding areas versus
Sure.
5 miles out.
Yeah, we can give you that number. I don't have it handy right in front of me, but it's definitely, it's going to be, you know, we looked at 5 miles, so 5 miles is going to be past Schiller Park at this point.
Ryan,
so
go back to the map, please.
I can
This
see
is the
that.
North Airfield. Ryan, go back to the map so that the trustee can see where 9 Center and 9 Right are in comparison to Schiller Park.
Well, Schiller Park's on the South Airfield, so it's not going to, these maps aren't going to show him. But, you know, Schiller Park would be, if we're looking at the South Airfield, would be
correct.
Close in.
Yeah.
So again, we can look at those numbers and get those to you.
Not just us, but the other, you know, surrounding towns too. You know, because I can see that increasing. I'm a little concerned about how much it would increase. Am I kind of right by increasing the noise closer to the airport?
So it will be louder, yes, closer to the airport, regardless. And whether the difference is significant between the two, I think it's about the same. It's about the same increase. So it's going to be louder intersection or full length at Schiller Park. Now, whether or not there's a significant difference between intersection and full length, we can give you the difference at the grid point at the 1 mile.
Okay.
And you know, you can make that decision.
Very good. Thank you. I understand.
Ryan, I've got a methodology question for this slide, actually. Can you, and I probably should know this, but for the average of decibels, you just can't add those up and then divide by 10, can you? Because it's logarithmic.
Correct.
Right.
Right. It's not so when we're averaging decibels, it's not a straight average, it's a logarithmic average.
Okay.
So, but again, when we're averaging just a difference, that is not logarithmic, that's just a number.
That's additive. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
All right, Dan, do you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Does somebody have something else they wanted to?
Take Ernie first.
Yeah.
Ernie, you can go first.
Thanks, Dan. Mr. Chair, if you want to defer this question to later, that's fine. But based on our previous discussion and the issue of the potential of a parallel runway on the North Airfield being designated as the long runway, how do we reconcile that with dealing with utilizing these runways with intersection departures?
Okay.
Well, the next topic is going to cover at least the long runway, but that your question, yes, is posed to both topics. You know, the North Airfield will require intersection departures at some times, but those are times to allow for efficiency and safety. But there are plenty of times throughout the night that the operations are low enough that full length can be used.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Now, Dan, are you ready now?
Yes. So the question on altitude and noise, I guess I would think of the altitude as sort of our Y component. There's also an X component, and the example would be somebody who lives under one of the arrival corridors. And what this committee has discussed is departure heading changes. And so in an example where you're living under an arrival corridor and there's a departure taking a 25-degree heading, how much a difference as far as the geography that flight would fly over does 1,000 to 2,000 feet make? It seems like it'd be significantly more than what we're talking about in altitude in the, what I'm calling the X dimension, if that makes sense. So if the aircraft starts 2,000 feet further down the runway and then initiates its turn, it's going to fly over a different geography than if it were to take the intersection departure. And is there a way we can quantify how much different that would be? And the goal is obviously to avoid overlapping those arrival corridors.
So Dan, it's Aaron. Are you talking about the example where in this modeling where Ryan implemented the 25-degree turn?
Well, what we're talking about here is just altitude. The difference between a 0-degree heading and a 25-degree heading also affects the geography that we're going to fly over. Right. So I'm trying to get an idea of how much different that departure dispersion is for a full length versus an intersection departure.
Ryan, go back to your map and try to describe for Dan, where's the point that the turn begins and how much deviation was built into the assumption?
So again, the turn begins at the runway threshold and there is no deviation.
So go back to the map and illustrate that.
So a 9 right departure heading to, it would make the turn to 065, 25 degrees. So I think what Dan, you're asking is, if we were to do a straight out departure, the community's residents in this area would experience a difference between intersection departure and full length versus a turn. What I think what you're asking is, these residents are experiencing something that they wouldn't have based on an arrival. And so this, are you asking the difference in noise impacts between an arrival and a departure turn?
Yes, but I think a simpler way to look at it is this example. If they were to depart full length on 9R versus intersection on 9R, would the turn initiate further within the airfield if you used full length and hence not overlap the same arrival corridor as much? Or do they turn at the same point regardless of whether you give them intersection or full length?
So Ryan, let me start and then you jump in. So Dan, for this modeling exercise, we assumed there was no turn earlier than the threshold. In reality, yes, that does happen. We can see those turns when we look at a quarterly fly quiet report, and that really depends on the aircraft size and the aircraft weight. Clearly, the smaller aircraft are more nimble and they are able to make those turns much quicker. So I think while turns are likely, we didn't want to overcomplicate the modeling assumption. So again, Ryan assumed that the aircraft departs at the intersection, the taxiway intersection. It is at full thrust down the length of the runway, and upon liftoff at the threshold, then turns to 25 degrees.
Okay. And I understand that for this comparison. What I didn't want the committee to lose sight of is there's another component to this conversation when we talk about consecutive impacts, where the length of the runway for that departure may matter in avoiding those consecutive impacts. So I understand what you're trying to communicate on altitude and noise. Just the geography component perhaps should be revisited. But thank you for the explanation.
Okay, Dan. Ron, you're next, and then Ernie.
Okay. Ryan may have confirmed this a few minutes ago, but I just want to have him reconfirm it. So if I heard you correct, Ryan, if you're doing intersection departures and an aircraft comes up that says they need the full length of the runway, air traffic would give them the full length of the runway like they do during
Yes.
daytime.
Yes.
And so, and then I think you also said that basically intersection departures would only happen at night when there's aircraft taxiing back and forth to the hangars, which we know pretty much happens in banks. So it happens early in the period, and then more at the end of the period. They don't really happen all night long. They're kind of sequestered into two different banks. So that's when the intersection departures would be most heavily used. And then in the dead middle of the night, more than likely it'd be full length departures because there won't be as many taxiing aircraft back and forth.
Yes, in my mind, there are periods during the night where there is little to no ground movements or traffic, and a full-length departure could be accommodated, whether that is based on an aircraft operational request or built into the program, where full-length departures are preferred when operationally feasible. So if I were to, going back to the criteria, let me just pull up your criteria here. Well, I guess I don't have it. But your criteria that the committee established spells out that Flight Quiet should have full-length departures when feasible. So your criteria kind of has that set already, and I don't think there's any need to deviate from that language. Air traffic would be able to utilize intersection departures as needed for operational safety and efficiency. And then at those times when it's not needed for safety or efficiency, full-length departures can be used.
But just to clarify, when they are using intersection departures, say you have 15 aircraft that are departing and one of them needs the full length in the middle of that, they would likely give it the full length like they do during the day now.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. I believe Ernie's next.
No, I asked my question earlier, Joe. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Ernie. Cynthia?
I'm good as well, Joe. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you. Ryan?
Okay, so we will move on to long runways. So this question of what long runways can we consider long runways when we are in flight quiet mode? The committee did pose this question to FAA, and FAA did respond with some feedback on some certain configurations. So once the O'Hare modernization program is complete and we have build out of 9 center and 9 right, 27 left at its full length, we are going to have 4 runways over 10,000 feet. On the North Airfield, we're going to have 2 runways over 11,000 feet. And most airports in the world don't even have a runway over 11,000 feet. So we're going to have 2 on the north and 1 on the south, all over 11,000 feet, which can accommodate the vast majority of aircraft departing or arriving at O'Hare. So the question is, which of these runways, when we are have a specific configuration with a specific arrival runway and a specific departure runway, when an aircraft needs a runway longer than may be scheduled, for instance, one of our crosswind, which one of these runways can they use? So we're going to start out with South Airfield configurations. We have on the screen here our west flow and east flow South Airfield configuration when we're departing 28 right and arriving 28 center in west flow, and departing 10 left and arriving 10 center in east flow. So in these configurations, if we were to designate a third runway as a long runway, it would be 10 left, 28 right. Obviously, it is 13,000 feet and can accommodate all aircraft. Now, if we were to look at the north airfield for west flow and east flow, arriving 27 center, departing 27 left and west flow, or arriving 9 center and departing 9 right and east flow, 9 right, 27 left with a length of 11,260 feet can be designated as the long runway in north airfield configurations and should be able to accommodate all aircraft. Now, when we look at the full airfield, when we are departing a runway on one north or south airfield and arriving vice versa, in this instance, we have departures on 27 left and arrivals on 28 center, departures on 9 right and arrivals on 10 center and east flow. We have 2 potential runways that we can use, 9 right, 27 left with over 11,000 feet, or 10 left, 28 right at 13,000 feet. And if we were to have one of these configurations, we could designate one of these 2 runways as the long runway alternative. Now, when we look at the crosswind airfields, when we're using our crosswind runways, this is the real question. When we are in one of these configurations and aircraft need to use a longer runway, which runway could they use? And so in west flow and east flow, in west flow, we've got 22 right and 22 left departures. FAA has come back and said that the preferred long runway in this configuration would be 10 left, 28 right. When we're in east flow, departing 4 left and 4 right, FAA has come back and said the preferred departing runway would be 9 right, 27 left for a long runway. So in summary, today in IFQ, we have pretty much one long runway that we discuss, and that's 10 left, 28 right. Once we have Flight Quiet 21, we could potentially have 2 long runways, one on the north airfield, one on the south. And each one of those runways could be assigned paired with a configuration so that it builds in predictability, further predictability into the program, so that when we have configurations that have shorter runways and may need a longer runway, we'll know which runway that is, and we can have further predictability into the schedule. Again, so north airfields, we're able to accommodate aircraft on the north airfield with 9 right, 27 left. South airfield, 10 left, 28 right. Mixed airfield, the full airfield with either one, depending on which configuration we want to use. And then the crosswinds, depending on which east flow or west flow, it's either one of the 2. So again, the Department of Aviation is in full support of kind of narrowing down this discussion of runways to these, either a north runway or south runway, depending on which weeks we're in a potential schedule, and are working with FAA and the airlines to make sure that that can be accommodated in a future program.
Any questions? It's a lot to think about.
I have a question.
Okay, Evan?
Yeah, so this is great. I'm glad we can get a second long runway in there, but it doesn't alleviate the problem of a pilot potentially requesting to use the 13,000 foot runway, does it?
Not per se. So if 10 left, 28 right is open and a pilot requests that they have to use a 13,000 foot runway, FAA air traffic would accommodate that request.
Okay, so we've previously discussed gauging the CDA's appetite for closing that runway to prevent a situation where a pilot is requesting it. Have we made any progress on that, Aaron?
Aaron had to jump off and take another call, but he'll be back. I'll note the question.
So I will say that as far as we're concerned, as far as where we're at with developing this program, we're not quite talking about any special requests. We're looking at it as you're either operating on the North Airfield or the South Airfield. We're discussing with the CDAs, discussing with the airlines. If the airlines, we haven't heard yet that that's an absolute, no, we're going to have, there's going to be 1 or 2 flights that have to have 13,000 feet. That discussion is still ongoing with the airlines. So the need for a special request, I guess to answer your question, is we're not quite there yet. So it may not be needed. It may be a case where, yes, we can close the South Airfield.
I feel like we've been kind of stuck in a quagmire on this question without much progress. Is there a way that we can start formalizing the question to CDA? Can this committee request from CDA, is it possible to close the Southern Airfield?
So the CDA is committed to that and is working with the airlines to make that happen.
Do we know when we'll have some clarity on that question? Because it's going to be, I don't want to be a nag on this, but it's very difficult for me to move forward with a plan not knowing this variable.
Yes, so we hope to have further commitments to that by the next meeting. But the CDA is in full support of closing a South Airfield or closing a North Airfield to accommodate a future flight quiet program.
Okay, that's very helpful. I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Dan, you're next.
Yes, thank you. Ryan, if you could back up to the slide where you had the 422 long runway pairings. Yes. So just to be clear, what this is just alternate for departures as opposed to arrivals, or is this both?
Well, if you go back to the FAA's feedback for the 4 right arrival for this configuration, 4 right arrivals departing 4 left, they said both 9 center and 9 right are acceptable for departures. Typically, we would be using 9 right for departures. They did say that 9 right, 9 center, 10 left, and 10 center would require extra spacing on the arrival. Therefore, 9 right would be preferred for arrivals. So in this configuration, 9 right is preferred for both departures and arrivals, or is acceptable as far as FAA air traffic is concerned.
Okay, and the same true then for
this configuration, 22 right arrivals, departures on 22 left, 28 center is preferred long runway for arrivals and departures. All other runways would require, okay, so we have this labeled wrong.
Okay, that was my second question.
Yeah, this should be, I apologize, this should be 10 center, 28 center, not 10 left, 28 right.
Okay, and again, sort of a mixed use, both arrivals and departures on a single runway.
Correct, and that is to accommodate CRO here. This runway, when we're arriving 22 right, is just a tad too close for CRO, as we've discussed, those converging runway operations.
Okay.
So I apologize for that. So 10 center, 28 center would be the long runway in this configuration.
Very good, thank you.
Right, Ron?
Yeah, so just building off of what you just said, Ryan, from a land use standpoint, especially to the west of the airport, departures on 28 right are more favorable than departures on 28 center. So, and arrivals too, arrivals on 10 left would be more preferable than 10 center to the west. Are there any discussions going on with the FAA to see if that long runway on the south can be switched to 10 left, 28 right? I know they say a CRO procedure would be needed. That's not necessarily something that is a deal killer, but what are the discussions happening right now regarding those 2 runways?
Yeah, we'd have to talk further with the FAA on that question and get some clarification.
That would be important to us.
Do you have any idea when we're going to get definitive answers on any of these things that we're talking about right now, Ryan?
Well, they've been, I mean, we've been getting steady feedback from them, so I don't want to put a timeline to say when they would respond, but we've had regular discussions, and they've been very accommodating.
All right, Cynthia? Cynthia? You have a question? We don't hear you, Cynthia. Well, until we do, Ryan, you want to continue?
Well, if we did no further questions on long runways or intersection departures, we're going to talk about kind of the next steps, where we're at moving forward. The next meeting in October, our intention is to do a very robust meeting on all of the alternatives that we have put together and that have been submitted from committee members to date, so that the committee can review and revise. And our intention is to have that the only agenda item in each meeting moving forward until we are at a point where we have a preferred alternative. So we are going to, from this point forward, strictly talk about alternatives and continuing to review and revise alternatives until the committee is comfortable with a alternative they'd like to move forward. So I know we've already gotten several submissions from committee members on their thoughts on alternatives. And so our intention is to go through all those, as well as the alternatives that we've discussed to date at the October meeting. So it's going to be a very thorough meeting on alternatives.
Okay, Ryan. Next on the agenda, Cynthia, we never heard from you, so we're just going to continue. Next ONCC Flight Quiet meeting will be October 27th. I'm sure it's going to be a Zoom meeting, and it'll be at 9:30. Cynthia, I see your name.
Yeah, Joe, sorry, my phone line got disconnected. I am good. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, next on the agenda is ONCC member comments, and we have one from Frank. You're on, Frank.
Hello, Joe. Thank you. I'd just like to make a comment about one thing that Ryan said about sound, that plus or minus 10 dB says the sound doubles, and you're right on that. There are three metrics when talking about sound, and it hasn't been decided which one is more important to people, the sound loudness or the acoustic pressure of the sound. As was pointed out in one of your slides there, that the 747 is 15 decibels louder than the smaller aircraft. And for nighttime operations, that's huge. Is it possible, Ryan, to advise the airport maybe to try to limit the 747s that are taking off and banking at a very low altitude? Because it's the pressure that you feel. Literally, the sound pressure is what you feel. I think we can't process sounds that are too loud, but we can feel them, and that's what's disturbing. And another thing, Ryan, you commented that the altitudes of those planes, and this was when you were talking about the intersection departures, that the altitudes are measured above ground. Was that a mislabeling, or how they're actually measuring it instead of above sea level?
No, that was correct. It's above airport elevation, and the Chicago's so flat, it's generally above ground level.
Okay, because even at above ground at 2,478 feet at 5 miles, that's not that high. And it's the 747s that are taking forever to get off the ground and rumble by. And I think if you can recommend to the CDA and to the group here that maybe trying to limit the 747 times that they can fly would go a long way, because we are here to try to help the citizens living around the airport. And that's my comment today. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Frank. If there's any other comments from the members? Comments from the audience?
Joe, I'm sorry, Elmhurst has a comment.
Oh, okay.
Thanks. I think I heard Ryan say that next meeting will be discussion about the alternatives, correct? And Alderman Dunn had to drop off. I just want to make sure, Jeanette, he had emailed you some comments, and we're going to formalize that on letterhead, and it'll be getting to you in just a few minutes here. But I just want to make sure that would be the appropriate time, that I didn't miss an opportunity to talk about those.
Not at all. We received them.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we got those, and we'll be discussing those at the October meeting.
Thank you.
When are we going to be taking configurations off the table? Start voting on things.
When do you think?
Yeah, sorry, Evan, you may have missed it, but
I apologize.
that's okay. Let me just pull this back up here. So our intention is to continue to only discuss alternatives until we get to a preferred alternative at each meeting moving forward. So our intention is to move that arrow to this box and continue to have discussions on the alternatives that we have already talked about, as well as the alternatives that have been proposed by committee members to date at the October meeting, and continue to do that at each meeting after until we get to a point where we can move the arrow to a committee recommendation.
And Evan, I think I mentioned last month, I'm hoping we can get to the committee recommendation as early as December. I don't know if it's possible, but that's what I'm pushing.
And for once in my life, Joe, I'm going to just take a more cautious approach and not try to blow the doors off the barn. I just think that we have these two concepts out there that we're awaiting the FAA and CDA to tell us what we can do on some things, and that will impact our decision making on the configurations.
And of course, we can't make a final recommendation if we don't have that information.
Okay.
I'm assuming at the moment that we're going to have that information by next month.
Copy that.
Got to have it by next month, or else the timeline gets moved. We're just not going to, not have all the answers and then decide something.
Right, and I just don't want to be using assumptions to make let's just make it on facts, right? We know that X is going to be allowed, so then we can make a decision, not assuming the FAA allows. I don't want to do that dance.
Okay. I don't think anybody wants to do that. All right, if there's any comments from the audience?
Ron, you have your hand raised?
Did somebody have it?
No, we got it. Thank you.
Okay. I'll try one more time. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll move so.
Second?
Second, Karen.
All right. I guess we need a voice vote.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Bensonville?
Yep.
City of Chicago 39th Ward?
Yes.
Des Plaines?
Yes.
Elmhurst?
Aye.
Harwood Heights?
Yes.
Niles?
Yes.
Park Ridge?
Yes.
River Grove?
Yes.
Schaumburg?
Yes.
Schiller Park? And Wooddale?
Yes.
Schiller
Thank
Park
you.
said yes.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, everybody. See you next month, October 27th.
Okay. Bye.